Okay, moving on. We kind of got 2 breast segments today. It just kind of worked out that way. So we are going to talk about a question that I get asked all the time, and it's, when should I replace my breast implants that I have? And you know, this is kind of a complex question. Have we ever talked about this on the show?
I don't think we've had a segment about it, but
you
we've
know, I was
talked
trying
about
to remember it. We've been around for so long that I can't remember all the segments. I remember there was a time a few months ago that I did a segment, and we had already done that same segment in the past. I couldn't remember if we talked about this.
I don't remember it anymore.
Yeah, I know, but we've been around here too long. So yeah, this is a question I literally get all the time, and it comes up most commonly when I get consults for people who either are getting new breast implants, meaning they haven't had them before, or somebody comes in, they want something done to their implants, and people often ask, it's the question comes in 2 formats. It's either, when do I need to replace my breast implants, or how long will my breast implants last? Because those 2 questions are intertwined. And as I said, you know, the answer is a little bit nebulous, and it's definitely not written in stone anywhere, meaning there's no real clear-cut answer, but I can give you some really good information about at least my thoughts on that. And so why is it up for debate? Well, you have to kind of remember the history of breast implants. So in the early 90s, I think it was 1992, the FDA took these silicone implants off the market. The reason they did that is because the old school silicone implants, the earlier generations, were liquid silicone, and they actually worked really well up until the point that they ruptured, and then that liquid silicone would leak out, and it was kind of like motor oil, and it really irritated the inside of the capsule. And we were talking about capsular contracture in the last segment in relation to Doja Cat. When the old school silicone implants ruptured and that liquid silicone got out, it was a mess, and the capsule would basically turn to like bone. I mean, people would have breasts that were as hard as like a softball, and not like soft like a cushy. I'm talking like a big baseball.
That's creepy.
Yeah, and it was wild when you would feel them, like they feel like a brick. And so when this started happening in like the 80s and early 90s, you know, people started taking notes like, hey man, these silicone implants, something's going on with them. And so the Food and Drug Administration pulled them off the market in like 92, I believe. And they started to do this big retrospective study of like, what exactly is going on here? And well, long story short, nothing terrible was happening to patients. It's just they were getting really bad scarring when that liquid silicone would leak out. So, you know, 8, 9 years go by, and they allowed the re-release of silicone implants with the caveat that they fixed this problem. And the way they fixed it is the term that you hear all the time, and you're probably familiar with, the gummy bear, right? So nowadays, the new generation silicone implants are not a liquid, they're a solid. So when the shells rupture, they don't leak, and hence you don't get these terrible scarring. But because everybody was having these problems, the FDA did put out some recommendations as far as screening breast implants and when they should be replaced. Did you get told any of that information when you had your surgery?
Yeah, they were like 10 or 11 years.
Replace? Okay. Very good. So they were going on that old data. So when the Food and Drug Administration re-released them in 2001, they said you should get an MRI every 3 to 5 years to check for rupture, and every 10 years you should have them replaced. Well, what happened? So in the mid-2000s, people started getting MRIs, and all the MRIs were stone cold normal. You know, they weren't finding any problems. So eventually plastic surgeons were like, this is dumb. Why are we doing this? Like, we have a 99.99% normal MRI, but it's costing the patient money, and so on and so forth. Well, the 10-year mark rolled around, and people started getting these implants replaced even though they weren't having any issue. And what did they find? Well, they found implants that were totally normal.
Yeah.
So at that point, plastic surgeons said, we are putting people through surgeries that they don't really need. That's not a good thing. So most plastic surgeons have backed away from that 10-year requirement for replacing implants. The FDA is still a little nebulous. Like, I actually tried to find what the FDA says specifically about it now, and there's not anything specific said anymore that I could find. I did see something from the American Society of Plastic Surgeons I found 2 things from them. One said maybe 10 to 15 years, but really maybe not. So again, there's no clear-cut definition of when you need to get these things replaced. However, I do consider myself an expert in this, having basically done fellowship for cosmetic breast surgery, as well as having been in private practice for 15 years, so I can at least weigh in intelligently. What I tell my patients is that if you have breast implants in and you are not having a problem with them, I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't get MRIs. I wouldn't, definitely not replace these things every 10 years.
Yeah.
So, have you thought about anything like that? I know you've had yours a while, right?
Yeah, I've had mine more than 10 years.
Yeah, well, my
For
wife has
sure.
too. Yeah, my wife has too. I think that y'all got them roughly at the same time. We have no plans whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so, the other question that pops up commonly is, okay, well, how long would these new silicone implants last? Well, that's a great question. The new generation came out around 2010, which is the 6th generation of implants. These things are insanely durable, and you can measure them versus the older implants that were not as durable, and they were lasting over 20 years.
Yeah.
So,
mine are saline, though. They're not silicone.
Oh, yours are saline? Oh, so that does bring up an interesting point. Because saline implants are a little bit different. The deal with saline implants is that the shape of them is not as smooth as a silicone implant. They get these really large ripples in them, and those ripples tend to be weak spots. And so I personally have found that saline implants past the 10 to 15 year mark start to see an increased rate of failure. And so with saline implants, when they rupture, it's instantaneously flat. Not instant, but within 24 hours, because it's saline, right? It's like IV fluid. If that stuff breaks loose, your body's just going to reabsorb it. And so what happens is you wake up one morning and it's like, whoop,
Yeah.
and then it becomes not emergent at all, because it's not emergent, but it's hard to wear clothes. And so what happens is people have to kind of scramble to get these things taken care of. And so, if I have a patient come in with saline implants, if they're over 15, then I generally recommend they should at least consider sometime in the near future replacing them, and definitely go to silicone. But it's not urgent.
Yeah.
Because nothing bad's going to happen. The other thing to consider, in 2011, the FDA did release a pretty massive kind of retrospective study on these silicone implants, because they've been out 10 years. And they did find that about 20% of patients either wanted or needed some revision. Now, that wasn't necessarily for rupture, though. A lot of it was either they had a contracture, or maybe their bodies had changed, maybe the breasts had gotten saggy, or they lost weight or gained weight, and suddenly the size wasn't what they want.
Yeah.
So they found at 10 years that about 20% of patients had a somewhat need for replacement, but that meant that 80% of people were doing just fine. So as I said, my patients, I tell them, look, if you got silicone implants and everything's fine, don't worry about them. And I wouldn't even, consider replacing them until, you're past the 20-year mark.
Yeah.
And even then it's questionable, because if you come in at 20 years, but everything's perfect, do you replace them then? Maybe. If maybe you want a different size, or, maybe you need a touch up for tightening skin or whatever, then it's an easier call. But what do you do if everything looks perfect? Do you replace them at 20 years? I probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
Why would you?
Yeah.
Because nothing bad's happening. If something bad's happening, your breasts will change. You'll know it, and you get it fixed. So yeah, it's kind of a big question, and definitely not one where you'll get the same answer. In fact, I saw a plastic surgeon on social media just a week or a few weeks ago, and this guy was saying, yeah, you need to replace them every 10 years. And I was just like, what? No.
Every 10 years so he gets more money.
Yeah, Sarah, that's probably pretty accurate. Think about it that way. Now where I've done hundreds and hundreds of augmentations, if I was forcing every patient to come back, after 10 years, I'd have a steady stream of patients at this point, because I've been in practice 15 years.
Yeah.
People coming back and having to pay me money to replace them.
You'd be going on all kinds of cruises.
I know, right? I could buy like 6 motorcycles.
Buy me a cruise. You
Yeah.
could buy a boat.
Hey, we need to go like on a field trip to one of these. We got to get an invite to one of like the Met Gala or something, and we'll like get the whole Nip Talk crew there, so we can like. We're gonna have to work on that. Trey said he was gonna work. And Trey's not here this week, but when he comes back, I'm gonna ask him.
I think we have to start at the bottom.
Just go lower. Okay.
Some random banquet of some sort.
Oh, hey man, I'm totally game. Hey,
And be the only people there being like, what are you wearing? And they're like,
dude, that would be absolutely
they're
hilarious.
like Dillards.
Dude, we should totally do that, Sarah. Like, I mean, as we gain a little bit more popularity, we're definitely gonna do that. We could go.
Maxx.
We could probably go to like one of the, the big banquets here in Dallas,
And just pretend.
I mean,
That we're we could say we're from Nip Talk, but they'll be like, oh, that's cool. They think
right?
we're like
Yeah,
a
we're
big
like this
deal.
really like huge podcast, and we want to look at everyone's outfits. That would be fun. All right, we're gonna do that. So, all right, here, let me recap this segment real quick. So here, come on to me for 1 second, because today we were talking about the big question of when do you replace your breast implants, and it is a complex question because there is no clear-cut doctrine of when the exact time it is to replace these things. In the past, the FDA did say that you should replace silicone implants after 10 years, but what happened? After 10 years, plastic surgeons, myself included, were opening people up and everything was completely normal, and we were putting people through surgeries they didn't need. So we've backed away from that 10-year replacement for silicone implants. And what I tell my patients is that nothing has changed and you're happy with the shape and the appearance of your breast, then don't worry about them. If something changes, absolutely call your surgeon, go and get a consult, and then you kind of go down that road of investigating to see if you need to have something done. But a lot of surgeons, myself included, have backed away from this 10-year automatic replacement. Now, saline implants are a little different. They are more prone to rupture after that 10 to 15-year mark, which is not a huge complication if it happens, but your breast will go flat in the span of 24 hours, and you might be scrambling to get into surgery to get it fixed so your clothes fit right. So yeah, when do you replace your breast implants? Kind of a big question. After 10 years, there is a certain number of people who want to do something different, meaning they maybe want to change size, or maybe they have a little bit of scarring they want to take care of. So about 20% of people at 10 years do have a reason to change their implants. But for those 80% of people who are doing great, my recommendation, don't worry about them. So there you go.